All right, mga kaabogado and future members of the bar, welcome back to this video, podcast, whatever. Today, we're diving deep into a significant case that tackles issues of corruption and the accountability of public officials. We're dissecting the Supreme Court's ruling in the case of Joseph Ruiz versus People of the Philippines and the Honorable Sindigan Bayan. So, what's the backdrop of this legal battle? Mayor Ruiz was the city mayor of Dapitan City from June of 1998 to June of 2001. The case stemmed from the two separate re-amended informations filed against him, alleging a violation of Section 3E of Republic Act No. 3019, the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act, and malversation under Article 217 of the revised Penal Code. The prosecution's core accusation was that sometime between May and June 2001, shortly before the end of his mayoral term, Ruiz conspired with Police Inspector Pipi Nortal to unlawfully withdraw 1 million pesos as a cash advance from the Confidential and Intelligence Fund or CIF of the City Mayor's Office for fiscal year 2001. The prosecution argued that Ruiz, acting with evident bad faith and or gross inexcusable negligence, allowed Nortal to request and receive this amount on his behalf. Subsequently, they allegedly used the funds for their personal benefit, causing undue injury to the city government. During the trial at the Sandigan Bayan, Nortal was discharged as a state witness and testified against Ruiz. The prosecution presented testimonies from various city officials, including the OIC treasurer, budget officer, city accountant, and a state auditor, detailing the irregularities in the release of the CIF. Ruiz, on the other hand, denied instigating the cash advance and receiving the money. He claimed that Nortal requested the funds to address post-election violence and that he merely facilitated the release. The Sandigan Bayan, however, found Ruiz guilty beyond reasonable doubt of both charges. His motion for reconsideration and subsequent motion for new trial were denied. Hence, Ruiz elevated the case to the Supreme Court via a petition for review on certiorari. Before the Supreme Court, the main legal questions raised were first, whether the Sandigan Bayan earned in denying Ruiz's motion for a new trial. Second, and more substantively, whether Ruiz was indeed guilty of violating Section 3E of RA 3019 and malversation under 217 of the revised penal code. Now let's break down how the Supreme Court addressed these crucial issues. On the denial of the motion for new trial, the Supreme Court affirmed the Sandigan Bayan's denial of Ruiz's motion for new trial. The court reiterated the requirements for granting a new trial based on newly discovered evidence as outlined in Section 2, Rule 121 of the Rules of Court. Now remember these four requirements. First, the evidence must have been discovered after trial. Second, it could not have been discovered and produced during trial, even with reasonable diligence. Third, it must be material, not merely cumulative, corroborative, or impeaching. And fourth, it must be of such weight that it would probably change the judgment if admitted. The documents Ruiz presented as newly discovered evidence were a demand letter from the city mayor to Nortal for unliquidated cash advances, including the 2001 CIF, an auditor's order to the city mayor regarding unliquidated advances, and a general fund statement of other receivables showing Nortal's unliquidated advances. The Supreme Court agreed with the Sandigan Bayan that these documents are available during the trial and could have been obtained with reasonable diligence from the Commission on Audit or the local government office. Furthermore, the court found that while these documents showed Nortal had unliquidated advances, they did not negate the established fact that Ruiz actually received and misappropriated the proceeds of the 2001 CIF. Thus, the documents lack the weight to probably change the judgment. On the guilt of violation of Section 3E, the Supreme Court upheld the Sandigan Bayan's conviction of Ruiz's for violating Section 3E of RA 3019. The court reiterated the four elements of this offense. First, the offender is a public officer. In fact, Ruiz was the city mayor. Second, the act was done in the discharge of the public officer's official functions. Right before his term ended, he authorized the release of a CIF of the CIF that is within his duties. Third, the act was done through manifest partiality, evident bad faith, or gross inexcusable negligence. And fourth, the public officer caused any undue injury to any party, including the government, or gave any unwarranted benefits, advantages, or preference. The Supreme Court focused on the element of evident bad faith. The court defined bad faith as not merely bad judgment or negligence, but imputing, highlight, dishonest purpose, moral obliquity, conscious doing of a wrong, or a breach of sworn duty through motive or ill will. The court found that Ruiz acted in evident bad faith when he instigated Nortal to request the CIF because Ruiz himself had several outstanding unliquidated cash advances, which under Section 89 of number 1445 or the Government Accounting Code or the Government Auditing Code and COA Circular 97-002 prohibited him from obtaining additional cash advance. His active facilitation of the request, including personally appealing to and instructing the concerned city officials, further demonstrated his schemes to procure the funds despite his ineligibility. The timing of the request just weeks before the end of his term and for the entire 2001 CIF budget also indicated a dishonest purpose. The court also found that the release of the entire 2001 CIF caused undue injury to the city government of Dapitan by depleting its intelligence funds for the remainder of the year, necessitating a realignment of funds. On the guilt for malversation under Article 217 of the revised Penal Code, again, the Supreme Court affirmed the Sandigan Bayan's conviction of Ruiz for malversation. The court outlined the four essential elements of malversation of public funds. First, the offender is a public officer. Second, he had custody or control of funds or property by reason of the duties of his office. So, as a mayor and approving authority, he had control over the CAF. Third, those funds or property were public funds or property for which he was accountable. The CIF is a public fund, and as a mayor, he was accountable for it under Section 340 of the Local Government Code and Section 102 of the Auditing Code. And fourth, he appropriated, took, misappropriated, or consented, or through abandonment or negligence permitted another person to take them. The crucial finding here was that the prosecution sufficiently established that Ruiz received the proceeds of the disbursed 2001 CF from Nortal and misappropriated 950,000 for his personal benefit. The testimony of Nortal, despite minor inconsistencies, was deemed credible and consistent with the testimonies of other prosecution witnesses. The Supreme Court dismissed Ruiz's defenses of denial and alibi as intrinsically weak and insufficient to overcome the positive testimony of the state witness. The court also emphasized that demand for the return of the malversed amount is not an element of malversation. It only creates a prima facie presumption of personal use, but malversation is committed the moment public funds are misappropriated. Now, what are the legal doctrines that we should highlight here? I would mention evident bad faith in Section 3 of RA 3019 because this involves a dishonest purpose or moral obliquity, indicating a conscious and intentional wrongdoing. Then also elements of malversation. The prosecution must only prove that the accused is a public officer and custody or control of public funds was accountable for them and misappropriated those funds. Also, the immateriality of demand in malversation cases. While demand can create a prima facie presumption, it is not necessary. It is not necessary a necessary element for the crime of malversation to be committed. And last would be the requirements for new trial based on newly discovered evidence. The evidence must be truly new, diligently sought, material, and likely to change the outcome of this case. This case of Mayor Joseph Ruiz is a powerful illustration of the legal consequences that can arise from the misuse of public funds and the breach of public trust. It underscores the importance of accountability for public officials and reinforces key doctrines in anti-graft and corruption laws. Let's take these lessons to heart as we continue our journey in the legal profession. That's all for today's episode. Stay tuned for more in depth discussions on landmark cases and essential legal principles. Keep studying hard, future lawyers.